This morning I signed the tax bill and the bonding bill, both the bonding and the cash provisions, and the supplemental spending bill with no line item vetoes on any of them. Those are the ones I've had a chance to review so far and discuss with staff and agency heads, and so I don't anticipate any more signings today, and have a chance now to, starting this afternoon, to look at the other bills. But for today, I was asked 2 years ago what would happen if we had a DFL governor and a DFL legislature, and I said one word: progress. And that's what we've achieved. States enjoyed really strong economic growth, which is a credit first and foremost to the people of Minnesota, to businesses and other entrepreneurs who made the investments to grow our economy, and to the hardworking men and women of their workforces who made those investments pay off and are continuing to do so. As a result, we were able to restore fiscal stability to the state after years of budget deficits and raiding from this fund and borrowing, quote unquote, from the schools, and all the kind of manipulations that went on to try to evade the collapse of our state budget. We're now on solid fiscal ground. We paid back the school districts entirely for what was owed them, and we still have generated a $1.2 billion surplus for this biennium, which 60% in this last legislative session went for tax relief, or the budgeted reserve, or the $31 million remaining on the bottom line. So we provided $550 million of tax relief to over 2 million Minnesotans, and $199 million in cash went for the bonding bill, along with the $846 million in actual bonding. I said all along, I regret that the Republicans forced cash to be spent for the bonding bill, which is not, in my judgment, the most prudent way to approach it. But nevertheless, we got critical projects: downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul, downtown Rochester, St. Cloud, Mankato, Lewis and Clark, which had been ignored until this session, when we made it a priority. And in terms of supplemental spending, $54 million for K-12 education and other investments that are going to pay off for continued growth in our economy and the health and well-being of our citizens. So I salute the legislature, the House leaders, the Senate leaders. They worked long and hard, got done early. Thanks for the weekend. But most importantly, they serve the needs of the people of Minnesota, not only on fiscal issues, but also on a number of policy decisions that I'll let them elaborate. But it was a very, very successful session, 2 successful sessions, and more progress than I've ever seen in 2 legislative sessions. And I think the legislators, all, and the leaders especially, should be very, very proud of what they accomplished. So, Speaker Thissen.
Well, I want to start by thanking Governor Dayton for his leadership this session and the sessions prior. All 4 years of his leadership, standing up to Republican policies first, and then working with us in I think, a very productive partnership. And the results have been an incredibly productive 2 years. We have worked together to build on Minnesota's momentum. I think focusing in on the priorities that Minnesotans broadly share, that's what we came in to office talking about doing, and I think that's what we've accomplished over the last 2 years. Our economy is growing. Our budget is stable. We cut taxes for middle-class Minnesotans. We invested in the bread and butter priorities that, again, all Minnesotans share, to provide greater economic security for the middle class. Again, that's what we talked about when we came into office. I believe Minnesota is on the right track, and together we are building a brighter future. There's more work to do, but we certainly are on the right track. And most of the credit, as the governor said, goes to the thousands of Minnesotans across the state who are working hard and building this economy, but also who showed up here at the Capitol and had their voices heard. And I think that's one of the things that has also marked the last 2 years, is that this legislature has been responsive to the voices of the people of Minnesota, the voices we heard on the campaign trail in 2012, and the voices who have showed up here at the Capitol since Election Day in 2012. And that is really how we do make the best policies for the vast majority of Minnesotans. Minnesotans, not just listening to the special interests, but listening to the voices of the people who come down to the Capitol here. I think the Star Tribune got it right this weekend when they said Minnesota is once again a state that works. I think that absolutely is the case. It's a state that's working for Minnesotans, for kids, for workers, for businesses and entrepreneurs, for seniors, for our caregivers, for middle-class families. And we want to continue that progress. Whether every Minnesotan agrees with every action, and I'm sure there's probably no Minnesotan that agrees with every action that we took at the legislature over the last 2 years, I don't think that there's any question that most will recognize that this was a productive and pragmatic legislature. We took our job seriously. We did the work that Minnesotans wanted us to do, and that really is the ultimate legacy and consequence of this legislature. And that brings me to some of the comments that Representative Dowd and the Republicans made yesterday in their session wrap-up. They wanted to talk about the consequences of one-party control. We welcome that conversation, because although Republicans might have short memories, Minnesotans do not. They remember the legacy of Republican control of the legislature in 2011 and 2012. They remember a government shutdown, ideologically driven gridlock, borrowing billions from our schools, higher property taxes. Minnesotans don't want to return to that Washington, D.C. style of politics here in Minnesota. In contrast, let's look at the past 2 years and the progress that they brought for Minnesotans. Free all-day, everyday kindergarten for every child. A tuition freeze for college students. Lower property taxes for the first time in a decade. Tax cuts for 2 million Minnesotans. The Economic Security Act for women, making sure that they can compete equally in the workplace. A higher minimum wage, broadband investment for greater Minnesota. A robust statewide bonding bill that took care of projects that have been languishing for many, many years. A balanced budget that paid down the debt that we owe to our schools, and perhaps most importantly, more jobs and a growing economy. That is a legacy that we'll run on in contrast with the 2 years of Republican control prior to that. Republicans also said that a consequence of the Democrats has been higher taxes. We welcome that conversation as well. We did raise taxes, like we said we would when we ran for office in 2012, to pay for the new investments in education and jobs that Minnesotans broadly agree with. And we did it responsibly and fairly and in areas that are broadly supported by Minnesotans. Republicans like to talk about the number. What we like to talk about is where those taxes were. We taxed the wealthiest Minnesotans, we closed corporate loopholes, and we raised taxes on cigarettes. Actually, things that are broadly supported by Minnesotans. And what did we do with that money? We reduced taxes, in particular property taxes, on middle-class Minnesotans. The reality is that coming out of the last 2 years, more Minnesotans and more middle-class Minnesotans will actually see their taxes reduced as opposed to going up. And I think that that's an important message for us to get across. And they don't like to talk about what we used with that money. If the Republicans would like to go out and complain about the taxes we raised, they also have to go out and say, we don't want to invest any more in education. We don't want to invest any more in transportation. We don't want to invest in jobs and economic development. We don't want to invest in caregivers who provide help in nursing homes and in home care all across the state, because they can't have it both ways. So we welcome that conversation as well. We are ready to take our story out to Minnesotans, and we're ready to do some more listening, because we know that there is more work to do to keep Minnesotans ahead of the curve. And we know just that these last 2 years are going to be an example of what Minnesota can accomplish when they have leaders that are willing to roll up their sleeves, get beyond the partisan politics, and really dig in and do the right thing by middle-class Minnesotans. I'll turn it over now to Representative Murphy.
Well, good morning. I'm really happy to be here today talking about the productive legislative session that we've just completed and the progress that we're seeing across the state of Minnesota. After a decade of ideological gridlock, we focused on the priorities of Minnesotans. After years of economic recession, we chose progress on jobs and the economy. And after years of short-term budgets filled with shifts and gimmicks, we chose a balanced approach for our future. We made progress by listening to Minnesotans and working to deliver positive results, and we have. We listened to parents who wanted a better education for their children, and we delivered, making a down payment on pre-K education, funding all-day, everyday kindergarten, and reducing the debt load for our students going to college. We listened to children who've been bullied, and we delivered, passing a strong anti-bullying bill that has buy-in and broad support from teachers, parents, and administrators. We listened to working Minnesotans who worked a full day, a full week, only to live in poverty, and we delivered an increase in the minimum wage for over 300,000 working Minnesotans. and we listened to women who've experienced discrimination. And we delivered, passing stronger protections in the workplace and measures to make equal pay for equal work a reality in Minnesota for Minnesota women and their families. We listened to Greater Minnesota to talk about the unique challenges facing rural communities, and we delivered there as well, making our state's first significant investment in broadband, funding a statewide bonding bill, and investing in proven job creation strategies that are already paying dividends across the state for businesses and workers alike. But what I like best about this legislature is that we chose to be ambitious, and we chose to solve problems. We have faith in the people of Minnesota, in our capacity together to build a better Minnesota from the middle class out. That is the kind of approach that we need to take into the future because we have more work to do to address the transportation challenges throughout our state, to make sure every 3- and 4-year-old has access to quality pre-K education, which the governor rightly highlighted in his State of the State address, and to continue to expand our economy for the middle class so everyone across the state can experience economic security and prosperity. We have a great story to tell, one of sharp contrast. Minnesotans will choose this fall a productive legislature prepared to deliver on their priorities, or a return to the ideological gridlock that stalled progress in Minnesota. I can't wait to tell our story. Thank you.
As the dust settles following this legislative session, I think it's pretty clear that Minnesotans will agree that this is one of the most productive legislative sessions in recent history. And I'll add that I think this is probably one of the most productive bienniums in legislative history. Taking a look back at this historically short 11-week session, the legislature and the governor have enacted a series of common sense measures to continue the state's job growth and create an economy that works for everyone. Whether it's a mother and father who took time to come to the legislature to lobby for relief for their child with seizure disorders, it's the working poor who came to the legislature to lobby for a minimum wage that would work for more Minnesotans. Or it was families who came to tell us that they want to see more resources invested in public schooling. The legislature listened, and we delivered this legislative session. Let's not forget that the tax cuts that were enacted come just over a year after we start staring down a November 2012 forecast of $1 billion deficit and another $1 billion owed to our schools. So, to remind you, the session's tax relief included a $150 million appropriation to the state's budget reserve account and established a mechanism to maintain a robust rainy day fund to help Minnesota weather future economic ups and downs. And no less important, there currently remains a $604 million positive balance projected for fiscal year 2016 to 17. I want to thank the governor and the House leadership for working with us in the state Senate to accomplish the goals that Minnesotans so clearly talked about over the last couple of years. The nearly $1 billion bonding package that was passed will make critical investments all over the state of Minnesota, whether that be at Vermilion State Park in the northern part of the state or the Rochester Civic Center in the southern part of the state. We invested in common sense priorities that will help create jobs and create a better future for Minnesota. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if there's anything else to be said. I think that we have covered a lot of ground today. I do want to just thank the governor and the leaders in the House, as well as Senator Bach, who was unable to be here, along with Assistant Majority Leader Sieben, for really working together. I think you guys know and have watched that it has been a short but very productive session in which we had to come to some major agreements. I too want to commend us on the Women's Economic Security Act. We know that not only do women needed more of these protections in the workplace, but we know disproportionately a lot of these women are women of color who are raising their households on their own. And with that, I'd like to take a moment, because my mother is here from San Francisco, to be there for my son's graduation. And though many of you met my father, I was really raised in a single-parent household with my father. As he recovered from addiction, as he moved his life forward, it was really my mother who raised me. So I am really glad that we were able to do that. In addition to that, the school lunch bill that we were able to do to make sure that no kid goes hungry, even if they're on a reduced lunch, we're really, really proud of that for families. The minimum wage bill, which I shared in co-authoring with Senator Eaton and Representative Winkler, once again, that went to the core of a lot of people that I represent in terms of having them be able to share in the prosperity of Minnesota, and I think we're doing well with that. And then also a lot of the work that we did in the supplemental budget around K-12 and early childhood education, I think, is really smart investments for our youngest Minnesotans. So I won't beleaguer all of the other great things that we did, but we are proud. We still have more things that we have to do. That always happens at the end of a session where some things don't get done, but I'm confident that we're going to work hard to get the House reelected and the governor reelected so that we can continue on this journey for prosperity for Minnesota. Thank you.
So we'll respond to questions on this general topic, and then after that, on anything else.
Governor, in the press release you said the bonding bill and the cash capital improvements bill will create 30,000 jobs approximately. How many of those will be this year? Do you have any idea? We're into the construction season already.
Well, they'll sell the bonds this summer, and it depends on how quickly projects are ready to go. I would say most of that impact will be following construction season, but some of it will get going this fall. Depends on what the weather does, but
And remember, some of that is cash, so we don't have to wait.
That's a good point. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Governor, you had earlier expressed concern with the size of the spending bill. You said that sign it in full. Did you contemplate line item beating to trim it down? Or?
You know, I looked at some things. I said at the time, I thought every individual expenditure was a very worthwhile expenditure. You know, that they added up to a little more than I would have preferred. But on the bonding side, you know, the DFLers in the House and Senate were forced into the cash commitment, and you look at those projects, and every single one of them is something that's going to advance life for people in that particular area and create jobs. So that one did not seem out of line at all under the circumstances. And the spending, again, so much of the focus on education, K-12, higher education, the broadband, over $100 million, you know, was really strong bipartisan support. $20 million for the propane shortage and over $80 million for the personal care attendants, which had broad bipartisan support. So there was you know, that element too, and I decided that in the spirit of a good session and a collaboration, that it would be better if I went along with what it was decided. I don't agree with everything, but as the Speaker says, no one does, and that's the way the process is supposed to work.
Governor, as you know, Minnesotans have typically selected divided government. This was kind of a rarity, one-party government. What's your argument for voters to continue one-party government here?
Well, look at the first 2 years and then these last 2 years. The first 2 years of constant clashing and brinksmanship and refusal to raise taxes on the richest 2%. So instead we borrowed money from the future, the cigarette revenues, we borrowed money from the schools once again. And the DFL legislature came in, we turned that around entirely. $2.8 billion owed to the schools is entirely paid off. We have 159,000 more Minnesotans working today than when I took office in 2011. The investments we made, as others have said, in education, K-12, early childhood, freezing tuition for 2 years. I mean, those are going to make a phenomenal difference for our state in the years ahead. So we're on the right path. We're moving forward. Why would we want to go back to the problems and failures of the past?
The Republicans will say that you Democrats are beneficiaries of generally an improving economy in the United States, and some of these chickens are going to come home to roost in terms of the spending and the tax increases that you enacted last year as far as constricting job creation as we move forward.
Well, the only tax increase we've had last year of any size, this really sizable number, was on the top wealthiest 2%. That's the part they always leave out. They talk about tax increase. Well, 98% of the people in Minnesota making less than $250,000 a year had no income tax increase. Smokers got a tax increase. We hope that revenue will go down because we hope they'll quit. And then corporate loopholes for foreign operations. So, and as the Speaker said, as a result, most Minnesotans got, middle-income Minnesotans this year got a tax cut, and also property tax relief, which was previously non-existent. So I think the average Minnesotans come out very well from a tax standpoint. We asked the wealthiest 2% to pay 2% more. They've done so. Most of them I've talked to are, maybe not thrilled, but willing to do their extra share. They appreciate the investments that have been made in education and economic growth, and it's paying off for Minnesota. So the facts speak for themselves. You can make up whatever theory you want, but when there are 159,000 more people working in Minnesota today than there were in 2011, and when Minnesota is the 5th best state in the nation in terms of growth in GDP, it's pretty hard to argue with success.
Governor, I don't believe anyone cited medical marijuana or same-sex marriage as accomplishments of this session. Are those accomplishments you're going to talk about on the campaign trail?
Well, same-sex marriage is certainly a tremendous accomplishment, in the last legislative session, and the medical marijuana was a triumph of the people who were here, who brought their case, and I commend the legislature for working out an agreement that had broad enough support from everybody who has a role in carrying that out, that we made progress there as well. Someone else want to step in?
I think Katie did mention it in her remarks, so the medical marijuana. No, I think the other hallmark of what we did, and it ties in with kind of our theme of focusing on the average Minnesotan, making sure they have the opportunity to get ahead, is we brought fairness to Minnesota, and we focused on those things that are going to make everybody's lives a little bit more fair, and that's a very fundamental Minnesota value that I think Minnesotans will appreciate.
Could you all explain why the WISA language was changed in the spending or the supplemental bill? What happened with that? Because some of the folks on the floor were questioning if it was pay equity is important, why isn't it important for everyone?
That was the intent all along of the language, and we found out after the fact. So, these are contracts where it was intended all along, and this is how it works at the federal government as well, is for people contracting with the state to provide goods and services. And so it was just clarifying what was meant all along. I don't think anybody's particularly carved out. What the challenge was when we're having people coming to Minnesota, under deed kind of grants and those types of things, they won't be subject to it. But that was never the intent all along.
Just want to follow, if you are Baxter International and you want to build a pharmaceutical plant, do you have to meet the standards under WISA or not?
Not unless you're providing goods and services to the state.
Mr. Speaker, the minority leader yesterday said as many as 20 seats are up for grabs in your chamber. Do you agree with that assessment, and how do you hold on to those?
No, I don't agree with that assessment. It's going to be competitive, certainly, but I think we're in a very good position, a very good story to tell. Our folks are already out there working very hard, and we have, and Erin can speak to this even better than I, some really great candidates in some competitive seats that on the Republican side as well. So we're going to be competing all across the state. Again, we have a great story to tell. I think Minnesotans are going to appreciate the direction that we've taken in this last year, particularly the fact that we actually got stuff done and have a government that works, as opposed to the contrast from the 2 years before. And so we look forward to getting out there. Do you want to talk any more about that, Erin? Okay.
Governor, are there any bills you don't intend to sign?
I have about a little more than 30 bills remaining, and this afternoon is the first post-session meeting I'll have with staff and a couple of agency heads to go over those, and there's nothing I intend to veto at this point. There are a couple that may end up that way. There's one on the distribution of data from the Department of Public Safety, which Commissioner Doman has some issues with, that she tried during the session to work out, but not successfully. So I'll have to see whether that's viable or not. The online gaming one is still torn, because I still see the play of people who are economically advantaged by the situation now, who don't want to give up. I don't see, for example, what lottery tickets by the ATM machines or pay at the pump gas has to do with protecting people from internet gaming. So the things like that I have to weigh in the balance. But most of it I expect to sign.
Governor, how soon might we expect signature on the medical cannabis bill?
I'm sorry?
How soon might we expect your signature on the medical cannabis?
Well, we're talking with people who might want more public signing. That's one of them. So, but I would expect this week. If it's not this week, actual sign, I'll sign them this week, and then we'll do a ceremonial signing if I can't get it organized for an actual signing.
Governor, are you confident that the medical marijuana proposal will be able to attract two companies to come here and do all this investment to set up for such a small patient base?
Well, I mean, it's the patient base that exists. The intent is to have rightful access to the product, and also they're assured that they're going to be supported in making a quality product. So I don't know the economics of whether it's profitable or not, and especially given the startup costs involved. But there's only one way to find out, and that's to go ahead and do it and see what develops, and come back to the legislature next session if there are parts of it that need to be worked out, and take it from there.
Governor, do you plan to veto the bill that exempts HMOs from the Data Practices Act?
I haven't seen that one yet. I don't know.
Within the budget bill, there's stuff dealing with oil and pipeline safety. It was something that came up early in the session, and then you made a point at the end of the session. Do you think it goes far enough, and how do you think it will prepare Minnesota for this influx of North Dakota?
I think on the grain transport, it's very important steps forward, and also pushing. I've written in Governor Cuomo's coordinated governors urging the federal government to enforce and accelerate the regulations on these new tankers that are better protected from a puncture and a collision than the older ones. So there's a lot of this that has to be done at the federal level because of the control of railroads established over local and state policies, a century and a half ago. Regarding pipelines, I was very, very disappointed that they were exempted from a number of the measures. That improved a little bit at the end, and I'm told they're now in the legislation required to at least contribute some money into the overall fund. But I will certainly come back, if I'm back next year, and attempt to include them in the same way that we have the train transport. I don't understand the rationale for that, but I don't expect to understand the rationale for everything.
What particularly do you feel is too weak?
Well, I think that they should be subject to the same requirements for protection, for assurances, that they have response teams available for, as I said, at least the funding is there. But, we have a major pipeline going across northern Minnesota that's going to be routed and constructed, and another major one that's going to be reconstructed. So the risk factor, in my mind, for pipelines is every bit as great as it is for train transport, and we want people protected regardless of how this oil and other flammables are being transported.
Can somebody explain the demise of the payday lending bill? What went wrong there?
I'm going to say, I had the bill. We in the Senate, we worked out an agreement in which, though the loan was capped at 10, we wanted it to be much lower. I think in the House it came out as 4. In the Senate it came out at about 8 with these breaks in between. We worked really closely. The advocates who brought me the bill, as well as the industry, worked up until the absolute last minute, and we thought, at least in the Senate, we had a deal where we did 4 loans, a 45-day break, then 3 loans and a 45-day break. And the idea is to get people out of the debt trap so that they had enough of a break. We'd like to cap it even more, but they had enough of a break. At a certain point, people are just paying to refinance their own loans. It was very, very, very late. It was one of the last 2 bills done in the Senate, and then we sent it over to the House. And I'll let the Speaker or the Majority Leader talk about the dynamics there, but it did take a very long time. We hope to bring it back next year if all parties are involved, but it was something.
Telling and very troubling that a couple of big interest groups could bludgeon their way through deny people in Minnesota the right to know where all this campaign money is coming from. As I said before, it doesn't affect anybody's First Amendment right to participate however they choose financially, but it does say that people should be able to know where that money is coming from, who's behind it, as they assess what that money is going to say about various other people. So that was very disappointing. And the toxic-free kids will come back next year if I'm back, bringing it back again, because parents have a right to know that their kids are safe with chemicals that could possibly cause damage, and I don't see any justification for any food company to want to prevent that from happening.
Before the session started, I had a court ruling saying the state really needs to figure out what to do about sex offenders, and if not, the courts will take over. Have you all left the state in a position now where we're going to see offenders released without you all having driven this decision at all?
Well, we did appropriate $3 million to do the psychiatric evaluations of people in that situation, which is what the one specific requirement that the federal judge imposed on us, so we were responsive to that. And nothing else was forthcoming from the federal judge in terms of specific steps that we need to take. And absent that instruction, it was just not going to happen this year. The Senate dealt with the matter last year, and thanks to Senator Limmer and some other Republicans, it has strong bipartisanship there. The House, I was in meetings last December with all the four caucus leaders, and said let's work together and come up with something. And Speaker was available, willing to do so, but the House Republicans just absolutely refused. And we weren't going to do something that was going to just become campaign fodder, so we had to put it off till next year. I asked Commissioner Cindy Jessen to reassemble either the previous task force or a new one and involve legislators, both parties, as well as other experts, and chart a course. What are we going to have to do? Because eventually the judge will rule, I expect, that we're going to have to provide provisional release in controlled settings for a much larger number of the people, 698 people that are now in that queue, than we have for the previous 30 years. So it's going to be a big shift. We need to prepare for it. We need to know where they will go. We need to have that staffed and have the citizens of the state, especially in the area around them, very well protected. And it's going to cost money. So we're going to work on all of that and be ready to go in the beginning of the next legislative session. And I expect there'll be a lot of dealing on that subject next year.
Governor, you're presuming that the patients will not be released? That's the presumption here? Can you tell Minnesotans that they're going to be safe?
I don't know what the federal judge is going to decide to do. That's his prerogative. We'll respond at that time to whatever it is he instructs. But I'm not going to call the legislature back in session. I mean, the session's been pretty clearly going on and ending at this point in time, and nothing came forward except for the directive to provide for the psychiatric examination. So I have no idea what the judge. I totally respect his prerogative, but in terms of what the state's capable of doing, we don't have the resources available to us under present statute to do anything significantly different from what we are doing now. And I think it's unrealistic to expect that we would be able to do so until the legislature reconvenes.
Governor, the accomplishments you highlighted today seem to overshadow your unsession initiative. And I'm wondering if you're satisfied with what took place and whether or not there's actually any less government now, or...
Well, we're going to have a news conference focused specifically on that issue, and Commissioner Surtees can join us, so I'm going to hold that one off till then. But I was, very, very pleased with what happened, and not only are a lot of our initiatives adopted, but a number of legislators jumped in and really developed their own initiatives and passed those. But I'll save that for another day. But
do you guys leave yourself adequate cushion given inflationary pressures and what seems to be a kind of tepid economic growth, more tepid than people had forecasters previously said?
Well, we operate off the forecast that's the last one made available, and the February forecast is the determinative forecast until next November, which then is superseded quickly by the following February. So that's when, for this biennium, we've done, I think, within bounds of what was prudent, and adding $150 million to the budgeted reserve. First time that there's been the reserve has been increased in about a decade, to me is, gives us that cushion if there's circumstances that we can't foresee. The next biennium, as Senator Sieben said, about $600 million remaining on the bottom line is projected, but there's also $403 million that was transferred from the general fund to the Healthcare Access Fund as a cushion there. So it's really over $1 billion that remains unspent in the system for the next biennium. So we hope the economic growth will continue. It seems to be signs that it will, and we'll be ready if it isn't. We won't owe the schools $2.8 billion. We won't have borrowed from everybody else. We won't have raided every other account and all these gimmicks that were used to try to plug the holes in the dike before. We're going to start on a solid foundation of financial stability and honest budget accounting, and we're going to be in a position to respond to whatever happens.
Will you be doing fly-arounds collectively anytime soon?
I tend to fly around a lot. I'm sure they do too. Sometimes together, sometimes apart. But we don't have anything for this week, as I got to figure out and sign the bills. But if they fly around, that's all the better.
When do you intend to file your paperwork to run again? When do you intend to file your paperwork to run again? Filing's open today?
Probably the day before the state convention, that Friday. Week from this coming Friday.
Governor, you worked so hard for the stadium last year. Would you be disappointed if we didn't get the Super Bowl?
Sure. I'll be disappointed. I'm realistic that the owners are not, in favor of spending their end of Januaries in northern climates, and so that's a big hurdle to overcome, especially after they just held the one at the Giants Stadium this last February. So, I hope for it. I think we deserve it. I understand. I haven't seen the presentation. I understand it's an outstanding presentation. I really commend the three chairs, Mr. Davis and Mr. Baker and Ms. Carlson-Nelson, for a phenomenal job that they've done to put this together and to raise the money in the private sector to pay for the costs that the host city needs to pick up. So there's every legitimate reason why we should get it, but it comes down to the 32 owners and a secret ballot, and they decide. So we'll find out.
What does it mean if Minnesota gets a Super Bowl, if not this year, the first year, the second year?
Well, if we do get it, we'll have a conversation on that subject tomorrow. If we don't get it, we'll change the subject.
Anything else? Governor, on Friday, on the Senate floor, Senator Peterson took you to task over medical cannabis, saying that the bill was not what it should be, and he blamed you for leaving 33,000 people out. I'm wondering what you thought of the criticism and whether or not you would support expanding the patient base in a second term.
Well, I don't expect any Republican legislator to have anything good to say about me for the balance of this year, so that's not surprising. We ended up with a responsible balance between, providing the medical assistance that we were told, and the advocates said had the best promise of helping people with, seizures and other kinds of disabilities, and not allowing the distribution of leaf marijuana, which was going to, in my mind, clearly be open the door for widespread distribution of that high caliber, high quality product beyond the scope of the people who are supposed to benefit from it. That's my analysis. So that's the basis on which I proceeded. Minnesota Medical Association, Minnesota Psychiatric Association, and other medical groups all supported that position and supported the more focused legislation that did pass. I think we're off to a good start. Now we got to implement it and see how it goes in the real world. But what happens in the next session? First of all, I don't have to try them around for it. I got to figure that out. But we'll see. We'll just see.
Can I just on that? I think that the point here, as you know, that the Senate provision that Senator Peterson wanted to pass got, I think, 20 votes on the House floor. Clearly not the House position. I think the question you need to ask Senator Peterson is whether he wants no people helped or 5,000 plus people help, because that's the choice he was left with. It's another example of a Republican being unwilling to compromise to help people to move in the right direction.
Anything else? Okay.